Retro.
Hi, this is Emily Swallow, the Armorer in The Mandalorian. You're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. This is the way.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And it's time for part 6 in our Darth Bane Path of Destruction book club. But before we get into the latest on Korriban, Jay, you want to remind everybody where we can be found on social media?
It's my pleasure as always, Dennis. We are on Instagram and Facebook at Podcast Stardust.
All right, this is the line. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we're going to be talking about part 6, well, what we're calling part 6 of Darth Bane, Path of Destruction, which covers chapters 16 and 17. So with that, Jay, take it away.
All right. So before I let you read the summary, Dennis, I figured I would catch everybody up on just a little recap of where we left off from last month. So hopefully everybody that's joining us tonight is all caught up. And if this is your, first time tuning into this, you might want to go back and read the other ones. But if you've already read the book, then you can definitely jump right in with us. So before we do jump into this month's reading, let's take a quick look back at where we left Bane. So last time, Bane's recovery from his devastating duel with Sirak became just as important as the fight itself. So instead of letting defeat define him, he embraced it as a lesson, realizing that raw strength alone wasn't enough to become truly powerful. So we also saw the introduction of Kas'im as more than just another instructor. His willingness to secretly train Bane hinted that he recognized potential in his student that others either overlooked or feared. Those private lessons began reshaping Bane's understanding of combat, emphasizing patience, adaptability, and strategy over brute force. Meanwhile, Githany continued weaving herself into Bane's life. Their relationship grows increasingly complicated, balancing genuine attraction with manipulation and ambition. And it's never entirely clear where sincerity ends and calculation begins, making every interaction between them feel like its own little battle. So by the end of chapter 15, Bane had started asking bigger questions, not just about becoming stronger than Sirak, but whether the Sith Academy itself was teaching the complete truth about the dark side. So this month, we're focusing on chapters 16 and 17. And so with that, Dennis, go ahead and read that summary.
Sure. So these chapters mark a turning point in Path of Destruction. Up to this point, Bane has been trying to survive and excel in the shadows within the Brotherhood of Darkness. Now he begins questioning the very foundation on which the Brotherhood is built. These chapters explore the idea that knowledge can be every bit as dangerous as a lightsaber. Bane notices gaps between what the Academy teaches and what the ancient Sith once believed. Those discoveries force him to reconsider not only what power is, but who gets to define it. Along the way, relationships are tested, rivalries reach a boiling point, and a memorable confrontation takes center stage. But beneath all the action lies a much bigger question. Can an order survive if it forgets its own history?
Ooh, big question indeed. So let's just jump right in. So we've got chapter 16 opens up with Bane and Kas'im training atop the temple on Korriban. So there's a lot of imagery going on here. We've got Bane and Kas'im both bare-chested. They talk about them both having this heat in their eyes as they're going through battle. And Bane is really trying to dissect the way that Kas'im is training him. So he's looking for a way to navigate Kas'im's two-bladed style, and he's not just determined to beat it, but he wants to learn it. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. So he's definitely keeping his focus on the attention to that and not just blindly going through unconscious patterns, because he learned the hard way that can be a death trap for him, and he didn't want to repeat that. So they've been actually fighting / training for over a month now. And Bane feels like he's getting ever closer to victory with Kas'im. And there's even at one point where Bane kind of lets up just a little bit, and Kas'im says to him, I expected you to fight until the end. There is little honor in surrender. And Bane responds to that with the quote, honor is a fool's prize, glory is of no use to the dead. And this is a quote from Darth Revan. And this is actually a result of Bane, doing his archive studying and his ancient texts summary, studies and things like that. And so they go into a brief acknowledgement of Revan and Malik's legacy and the Sith Master's ignorance to their own history. So did it surprise you that Kas'im didn't recognize that quote?
Not by the time you get to the end of this chapter, because one of the things, or in both these chapters for that matter, it only gets and it's kind of hard to put me in myself in the position of reading this for the first time, because this is my fourth, fifth, I can't remember how many times I've read this book, but that's one of the things that Bane's been discovering all along, is that the advantage he has is his willingness to do what Ian Malcolm talks about in Jurassic Park, earning the knowledge for himself, as opposed to just standing on the shoulders of the giants and not just deciding, hey, we can do this thing, should we do this thing? He's figuring it out. He's going back to the source, learning it, understanding it. And so, this is very much, there's a lot of things, and there's other comments I'll make later in the discussion about how much Bane realizes things that Palpatine puts into action in the prequel and original trilogies. These teachings that have kind of eventually get passed down through the rule of two. And one, it's just this, yeah, sure, I could have fought to the end, but where would that have got me in this situation? It's like he knew that he couldn't win the fight. And this was not a battle of, which will also come up in chapter 17. This was not a battle of, I defeat you, I become the master. All the stuff is happening in secret. It is, there's no payoff for Bane to fight to that end. And that's not the point of this fight anyways. The point of this fight is to continue to learn and to get knowledge from a master.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I've always appreciated about Bane, is that from the very, very beginning, he, sometimes loses his way, obviously, and he gets down a different path from where he probably needs to be. But he's so smart, and he can see that bigger picture, and he can see more of almost like the end game kind of thing. And he doesn't just take things at face value. He's always wanting to dive in and find out the why, not just the what. And so, and that's a lot, I think, the reason that he, really appreciated the text and the study of the archives. And it was obviously not something that, he necessarily had to do. He chose to do that. And he even goes on to say in here that he thinks that the archives have given him an undeniable advantage over the other apprentices. And because it's shown him the true power of the dark side. And what I like, though, about that is he also admits that, yeah, these are great pieces of information, but I realize that some of these tales are probably myths. They're probably exaggerated. I get that. But they've served as inspiration to push himself further than he would have otherwise. And I think that's a really key thing.
Yeah, right. Because, and there's a conversation that they're about to have that we haven't touched on yet, and it's over the Darth title. And what he comes to realize is that the Sith are no longer about reaching that ultimate power in the individual through the dark side. It is a bunch of guys that are now interested in banding together and pooling their power in order to exert their will over the galaxy. But Bane has realized through these ancient texts that that's not what the Sith are intended to be. The Sith are intended to be, the idea of a Sithari, is this perfect dark side being, so to speak. Well, the dark side is not about sharing power. The dark side is about, channeling your hatred, channeling your anger, and putting it towards excelling as the individual in this situation, which is why Kas'im's answers about why aren't we using the dark title are so unsatisfying to Bane in this case. And so it's through his exploration of these texts. He's read Darth Revan, he's read other ancient Sith masters that had that Darth title, that he really does, he does get this inspiration, as you were saying, about, this one Sith Lord was, feared because he managed to wipe out a planet by causing its sun to go supernova. And while that might be mythological, maybe there is a truth. One of our favorite quotes is that there's always a bit of truth in legends.
Right.
Maybe he created some sort of super weapon that caused that sun to go supernova, but it was through his Sith prowess that allowed him to accomplish such a thing. Biding his time in secrecy, building up his power, and then unleashing that weapon on his enemies in that regard. So his diving into the archives cannot be understated as to how important it is. It's allowed him to see a larger vision of the Force, to loosely quote Palpatine from Revenge of the Sith, a larger view, I should say, in this case, that these other Sith quote unquote masters have put aside.
Right. Yes. And obviously going forward, that's going to be key, as well as we're going to see at the end of chapter 17. But let's talk a little bit about his inquiry into the Darth title. So as you were mentioning, Bane asks Kas'im straight out. He says, why don't the Sith use the Darth title anymore? And Kas'im shares with him that it was actually Lord Khan's decision, that it was a relic of the past that doesn't represent what they are now. And that definitely does not sit well with Bane. But first of all, he thinks to himself, well, gosh, there's got to be more to it than that. And there's got to be a justification on Khan's part for that. And Kas'im comes back and says, it was a claim of supremacy. You either bow down or you're destroyed. And then he follows that up by saying, there can be no peace for a master who dares to use the Darth title. And Bane immediately replies with, peace is a lie. There is only passion, which of course we know that is the first line in the Sith code. And Kas'im doesn't even pick up on that. And so that was like a moment where I'm like,
well, he does.
He does, but he doesn't. He doesn't address it.
He's like, well, that was a poor choice of words, is what Kas'im's response is. That, he was trying to basically say that, you're going to be frustrated. And that it's like, it's not that a Sith Lord is looking for peace, but Bane captured him in that moment here, which is that he's trying to get Kas'im to talk about it, and for Kas'im to acknowledge that there is some absurdity, there's some hypocrisy to this belief here, based on everything they've been told and taught, which is that, we're supposed to be out there dominating the galaxy, all these ancient texts and our code, which we may have discarded a whole bunch of stuff from our ancient Sith teachings, but the first, we still adhere to the code. And the first line is, peace is a lie. There's only passion in this regard. And then, Kas'im's like, ugh, annoying student. It's, that was a poor choice of words. But the point is that, life becomes so much more complicated, and, Khan just, and Kas'im is conflicted about this, that he's part of the Brotherhood of Darkness, and he's found this position on Korriban, teaching others how to saber fight. But it's like, when we band together, when we don't use the Darth title, and we all start, put aside our desire for dominance, then we can achieve so much more together. But it's just, Bane recognizes it for how empty all of that is in this. And he talks about the myth of equality, that's designed to protect the weak. And this is why there has to be the rule of two eventually, that a master to embody the power, an apprentice to crave it, a master to teach the apprentice everything he knows in the hopes that the apprentice will grow more powerful him and challenge him and take him out, so that the Sith become more powerful. Whereas under this brotherhood, what predated the Brotherhood of Darkness, there was so many Sith that the apprentices wanted the power. A Sith Lord would have more than one apprentice, so the apprentices would band together and defeat the Sith Master. But they didn't defeat them because they were more powerful. It was the cumulative effect. And so the result is, it was a blunting of the power of the Sith, that you didn't have true Sith Masters becoming worthy of that Darth title and progressing the power of the Sith.
Right. And I think that Bane wants to really respect Kas'im, which I think he does. But just when he thinks that Kas'im is going to be like, okay, then he almost like falls back a couple paces in his respect for him, I guess you could say, because at the end of this particular section, Bane kind of acquiesces to Kas'im, like, okay, yeah, but really he's thinking he's not going to be able to teach me what I need to know. Like he can teach me everything with the lightsaber and I can learn all these skills from him, but when it comes right down to it, he has just shown me that he is not my guy.
Well, and there's a beautiful symmetry from this part of the chapter because it starts with Bane not fighting to the death because there's there's no the dead have no use in glory and honor in this case, right? And at the end of this discussion with Kas'im, he realizes he's not getting Kas'im to engage him in any type of meaningful way on this topic, and all he's doing is frustrating Kas'im. And so there's no point in taking this conversation to its end, fighting to the death, so to speak, because there's no glory for him at the end. There's no point in continuing this conversation. So I think this was a very subtle thing that Carpesian did in this part of the book, whereas Bane just told Kas'im, there was no point in me fighting to the death because there's no, the dead have no glory and honor. Same thing here. It's like, there was no point in me arguing this to the end because you aren't going to let me win in this situation. And at worst, I was going to weaken my position with you.
That is such a great point. I love that you pointed that out because I had not made that connection that exact way, but you're so right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. So, so anything else you want to say about that before we switch to the next section with Githany?
No, it's good.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah, so next we get into Githany and Bane goes back and starts talking to her and he's kind of sharing his frustration with her on the masters and he asks her, he's like, well, what do you think about your training? How do you feel about the masters? And she kind of, sidesteps it a little bit and talks to him a little bit about it, but then she changes the subject and says that she's going to challenge Sirak. She uses that as her opening to say she's going to challenge Sirak. And she does this because she knows that Bane's going to say, what are you doing? Like, why would you think about doing that? So it's this whole manipulative control thing to get a reaction out of Bane because she knows that the only way to truly get rid of Sirak is to assassinate him. And she doesn't want to be the one to come up with the idea. She wants Bane to come up with the idea. So Bane does propose destroying Sirak in the dueling ring instead of Githany. He's like, no, I will challenge him. And then he comes out with the truth bomb that he's been training with Kas'im. So here is Bane, kind of putting his, I don't know if trust is necessarily the right word, but I mean, obviously he's been also studying with Githany and there's this attraction between them as we've talked about before. And there's kind of this bond that they've started sharing together. And so she turns that sort of into this moment of, oh, Bane, I'm so worried about you. And he kisses her. And I don't know about you, but I get the feeling just the way that happened that it wasn't the first time, but we didn't necessarily get like the first time that they kissed because there was no, tension buildup kind of thing. It was just almost very tender. And so then we also see, I have to point out, a couple of Githany's tells once again. So we talked about this last time where she bites on her bottom lip. She's twirling her hair and her fingers. And so after all of this and Bane walks away, she finds a tear staining her cheek. And she's like, oh, what is this? What have I done? Kind of thing like, why am I feeling this way? So, yeah. So how do you feel about that whole interaction and the way that this is setting up this fight with Sirak?
Yeah. A couple things. One, there's a lot of conflict in there because Githany's intentions have always been to use Bane, and there's this discussion, like as you pointed out, it was like, she brought this up, like, I'm going to have to challenge him. I don't have any choice. Well, why? Why don't you have any choice? It's, she's basically saying that, they know between the two of them that she wants to be the premier student at the academy. And so in order to do that, she has to take out Sirak. Fine. And then, she makes mention that, well, if I can manipulate Bane into doing it and then accidentally let slip to the masters that he assassinated Sirak, well, then that gets him out of the way and that puts me in an even better position. But then she notices, like, oh, wait a minute. This is, she notices that she had not so many words, but she has like feelings that she was not expecting. And the way you put it is like, she suddenly finds herself biting on her lip and she's like, what am I doing? And then, I like the way that her hand automatically went up to her hair and started twirling it of its own accord. And then she like yanked it down when she realized what she was doing. And then she couldn't deny to herself that she had these other feelings for Bane. And she's wrestling with that because she doesn't really want those feelings for Bane. What she wants is to manipulate him into doing what she has desired, but she wasn't being careful enough this entire time when she's been tutoring him in what it is that they've been learning from the masters and classes that he wasn't allowed to attend and the like. I took it as that was their first kiss in this situation. And there was this other earlier comment about how there was this yearning between the two of them, but they never consummated it. And because there's all these other like things standing in the way. And so I don't want to give Bane too much credit, but I felt like that was very much a manipulative maneuver on his part, where he's going to make some realizations that he doesn't completely understand himself, but he really does understand Githany in this situation. And I think he you mentioned the tells. I think he read those tells as well. And that kiss, I think there was actually some yearning behind it, but I also think that was him. We just talked about all the knowledge that he's picked up from reading the scrolls from these masters, these Sith masters, these Darths of the past. And he knew what he was doing in there. That wasn't purely a moment of passion, no matter what the first line of the the Sith code is. Pieces lie, there's only passion. He's got a plan. He's got a game plan on this, and he's manipulating her as much as she's trying to manipulate him.
No, I agree. And I do think that there is a certain amount of affection. I don't know if affection is necessarily the right word, but that he has for Githany as well. And so, and I think that is something that he definitely plays on. And as we see later on, it's also a key in something else that happens to him too. So I don't want to get into that too much, but
Right. I think one of the things that's a useful distinction right now is that with Bane, he is first and foremost a Sith now. And he's not worried about things like attachment and fighting against the ideas of attachment. He is putting plans in the future, and he's actually aware of the potential attachments around him. And there was the comment he made early in this book that attachments don't do anybody any good in the grand scheme of things. And so while there is this yearning, he's not interested in doing anything for Githany's sake in this book. He's, as we'll see in later chapters, he considers her an ally for various things that I don't want to get into right now, so we don't spoil parts of the book. But it's not out of fondness necessarily for her. It's out of a hope that she might evolve into something. But he's looking out for himself, which is very different than Anakin, right? He falls to the dark side because he gives into anger, he gives into hate, and he's afraid of loss. It is his attachment that brings him there. And that's a sharp contrast from what Bane is.
Well said. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too that the relationship between Bane and Githany is such an important one because there's a lot of parallels that you can draw between the way that their relationship evolves and just the Sith, and the way that Bane reconstructs the Sith through the rule of two too. So we'll leave that one on the table for now. So the chapter actually ends up with basically Bane not sleeping the night before the drills And then we open up to the next morning and the rain is coming down hard. So we opened with hard rain. We're closing the chapter with hard rain. And Bane is feeling the dark side. And then he challenges Sirak because he says it was time for his hate to set him free. So what do you think is there anything to the symbolism of the rain and a reason for it?
That's a good question. I hadn't really considered it. I don't want to leap to a lot of the cliches about symbolism when it comes to water or rain like that, purifying baptisms and this, that, and the other, because I feel like Bane's already gone through all that.
Mhm.
And in this situation, if anything, I think there is he takes off his robe and Sirak takes off his robe. And of course, Sirak has got his little minions, the other two Zabrak, who I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but one takes a saber while he's taking off the robe. The other one takes the robe, and then the other one gives the saber back. And meanwhile, Bane just like shrugs off his robe and lets it fall where it may in all of this. And he's acutely, if anything, it sets a great environment. This is a very cinematic scene that Carpesian writes in this regard. I'd love to see this one on the big screen sometime. Just thinking of the gray clouds and the clashing red lightsabers, and you could see someone like and Ray Park playing Sirak, and then The Rock. I don't know. Just think of someone who's big and bald that playing Bane, going at it with steam coming off their lightsabers here. But it does set in a great environment. But what do you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm with you. I think that a lot of it is just to set the mood, but I think the rain also makes it more difficult in some ways to perhaps focus. And
Mhm.
so it's just another obstacle that they both have to overcome, but Bane was training in it. So I think that there's some, kind of a kernel of advantage maybe for him in that way
Yeah.
because he had just left Kas'im with training in the hard rain, and so it kind of picks that up from where that left off, but maybe I'm reading too much into that.
No, I don't think so. I think the other thing about it is that, what the things I point out is that, the students show up for this training session and they see the clouds rolling in, and they're all, there's some of them that don't care, but there's others that are grumbling because they know that it doesn't matter how hard it's raining, that Kas'im's going to make them train in this. And then when the training is over and they all circle up for the dueling ring, there's a lot of them that are already ready to go. But that's the moment that Bane decides to reveal what his real power is by challenging Kas'im. And
Yeah.
catches so many of them off guard. So it is just kind of you could see how, and it's not said in this way in the book, but like a lot of them, like, I want to go back to my room and dry off and then get on with my studies for the day. And now Bane, this dolt who got destroyed by Sirak the last time he was here, is now challenging him again. And so I have to watch this guy get destroyed in the cold rain. Thanks. And of course, that's not what happens.
I love that imagery. That is awesome. Yeah, and I love that it's such a small detail, but I'm glad that you pointed out the fact that Logray, I think it's Logray and Yivra is their
Mhm.
names, how they're just like these little minions that are like, oh, Sirak dropped his robes. We must pick it up for him, kind of thing. And so that almost represents that togetherness, if you will, that the current Sith Masters are all about, being one with each other kind of thing. Whereas Bane's just like, I'm by myself. I'm, gonna rely just solely on me. And, I don't need y'all minions kind of thing. So I think that
Right.
that's a cool little symbolism. So we are to the big fight here. So we start off with Sirak. He's actually reacting very calmly to this challenge. And
Mhm.
in the book, it said he had a ruthless efficiency in his preparation to fight Bane. And this told Bane that Sirak was actually taking the fight very seriously and wasn't taking him for granted. And this actually gave Bane a little bit of respect in knowing the fact that, okay, Kas'im's actually smart, or not Kas'im, sorry. Sirak's actually smart. He's seeing that, I wouldn't be challenging him unless I really thought that I could actually beat him. So he was able to get a little bit of respect for Sirak, I think, in that point, don't you?
Yeah, I
He just still doesn't like him. And he wants to destroy him, but he still respects.
right. Yeah, well, and a couple of things that lead up to this is that while they're going through the training session before they get into the challenges, Bane like makes sure to not spend a whole lot of time looking at Sirak, because he knows that it would start making him question everything that he had discovered about Sirak over the weeks leading up to this. And the whole point is Bane was confident now. He didn't need to question himself. He knew what Sirak was capable of doing. Why look over there and second guess himself? I have to admit, I had a false memory that Sirak initially denied Bane's challenge here because Bane wasn't worthy of him after having to so thoroughly defeat him the first time. And I think that was only fueled by some of the comments that, Sirak makes earlier in the book, where it's like, I don't issue challenges because why would I challenge I'm the strongest here. People challenge me. I don't challenge others. And, what does he have to gain by beating Bane again after he already fought him? But he doesn't say anything. He just goes through with getting ready for the challenge. He takes on all comers, which I'm glad my false memory was wrong, because that, Sirak may not be the Sithari, but it is this, I think it's and he doesn't have Bane's experience with reading the archives, but it is just kind of I am at the top. This guy is challenging me. I need to wipe him out. And this is the method that's being presented to me in this moment. So that's what that's what I get to take advantage of. I don't get to lay a trap and do it in secrecy for so long.
No, I think that's a good thing to point out. And I think it's also, once again, worth noting that Bane doesn't even believe in the Sithari anyways.
Right.
So, he's already saying, well, Sirak is not all that kind of thing. And a lot of that comes from, of course, his studies of the archives. So we get into the fight, and it's so detailed and it's so good. And I just love how Karpyshyn does all of his descriptions of things. And like you said, it's so cinematic, and you can definitely picture every little bit of this. And there's at one point, kind of towards the beginning of the fight, where Bane realizes that he could have ended it pretty early, because Sirak had left himself open, and he could have just tapped him right on the arm and ended it. But that's not what he wanted. He wanted to destroy Sirak. So during the fight, he kept actually pulling back just a little bit. And then he realizes that Sirak's starting to wear down a little bit. He's becoming a little bit sloppy, maybe even a little bit desperate in some of his moves. And Bane was just getting hungrier and hungrier and hungrier. So he was talking about it as this hunger that wasn't being fed. And so it just kept building within him, and he could feel this dark side just building within him until he finally explodes. And once again, we get a very graphic description of how Sirak breaks. And so Bane breaks Sirak's forearm and his lower leg. And I'll spare everybody the gruesome details of, we'll just say, hello, bone kind of thing. And so then all of a sudden, they kind of the movement was so fast is another thing that they said, that the students almost couldn't even keep up with it. So Bane actually stops and allows Kas'im to intervene. I don't know if stops is necessarily the right word. Hesitates.
Just long enough. Right.
Yeah, just long enough for Kas'im to say that one word, enough. And then Kas'im says, I want you all to see what happened here. He praises Bane's victory to those other students, and he says he has achieved Dunmok because he was smart. And he goes on to say, secrecy can be your greatest weapon. Keep your true strength hidden until you are ready to unleash the killing blow. So, what do you think about the events of this fight? Do you think, obviously Bane wanted to destroy Sirak, but do you think that he should have taken the initiative, blow and used that to his advantage? Or do you think that he did the right thing in waiting until he was able to wear him down and completely decimate him? Because that was the goal.
Right. Yeah. You just said it. His entire goal was to destroy Sirak here. Now he comes short of that goal. And Githany calls him out on that, and we'll get into that in just a second. But I really like the way that this was written and the way that this came out, that, as you pointed out, Bane had multiple opportunities where he could have landed a blow and won the fight, but it would have been quote unquote minor victory in that regard. Yeah, you got the guy on the arm, you won, the fight's over. And that, that first, it's first contact really is what wins here. But the point was he wanted the opportunity to land those blows in a way that would allow him to quote unquote destroy Sirak. And so, Bane went about like holding back and deliberately demonstrating some oafishness, for lack of a better description, in his fighting, some clumsiness in some of his things, but he did so to make Sirak overconfident. And then when that overconfidence failed, that's like, he hasn't won this yet, because Sirak never had a long duel with anybody. Then it starts, he could see he starts to tire. And it was like imperceptible to most at first, but Bane could see what was happening, that just microseconds off on some of the things that he was doing. And then the slowness turns to frustration. And then the frustration turns to desperation. And that's when Sirak dropped any pretense of a defense that allowed Bane to unleash all that anger and all that hate that he built up to the dark side and deliver those two blows, those two devastating blows, breaking his wrist, breaking his leg. And as you just said, Kas'im declares the Dunmach, that, by hiding his power, hiding what he's capable of, and then unleashing it at that last opportune moment to do so. I thought it was perfect. And no, he should not have gone for the easy win in the beginning. That would have elevated him at the temple, but now he's not only is he elevated, he set himself way ahead of all the other apprentices there at the temple. And there's no question about it. He just destroyed the Sithari in this duel. No, I mean, it was a rout. He took everything that Sirak had to dish at him, and he absorbed it, and then delivered this devastating blows. So no, that was perfect. But the greater symbolism of all this is that line that, allegory, I suppose, is that Kas'im delivers is like, secrecy is your greatest weapon. Hide your true strength until you're ready to deliver that killing blow. This is exactly what Palpatine does, right? Yes. When we get to the prequel trilogy, is that, the Sith, Bane passes down this ideal. We are not prepared to defeat the Jedi. We have to gain power. We have to grow our strength. And that gets passed from master to apprentice to master to apprentice, on and on down through the generations, until Palpatine puts himself in that right place through secrecy, accumulates that power, accumulates that strength, and then unleashes it on the Jedi to essentially destroy them in one fell swoop. So,
right.
It's probably obvious to a lot of us that are Star Wars fans that have been reading it and studying it and revisiting it for so many decades, but I love the way that it was written here, so that it's not like Cartesians winking at you like, you recognize this? It's just it was in a completely different context in this situation. And this is one of the reasons why I like Kas'im, is that, despite his frustration with Bane's questions, and I'm not endorsing the dark side, I'm not endorsing anger and hatred, whatever. As much as Kas'im was frustrated with Bane, he was also frustrated with the other Sith Masters. Right. Because this is not what the Sith Masters, the Brotherhood of Darkness, are telling everybody right now. They're all about overwhelming their enemy with massive force right now. So
exactly. Yeah. And there's a lot of things that you said that I was going to ask you, do you think that this was a foreshadowing to the rule of two, this statement that Kas'im said about keeping your true strength hidden? Obviously, yes. And then, the other thing with that too is I do think that Kas'im does kind of waver back and forth between buying into what the Brotherhood of Darkness is selling versus, believing that, maybe Bane's onto something here, and kind of, seeing the truth in that. So yeah. And obviously with Sirak, he wasn't just destroyed physically, he was destroyed morally, his entire being was destroyed for sure. So yeah, so that's a big part of that. So yeah, so after that though, Bane leaves, obviously leaves the ring, and Githany comes up to him and is like, "Why didn't you kill him?" She's very angry. She's very harsh with him. Like, "Why didn't you kill him?" And she calls Bane out with that, and she notices that he hesitated with him, and she said, before Kas'im stopped the fight. And so she knows that Bane was not, like going at it like he should. And Bane was kind of, trying to placate her a little bit and saying certain things. And she was coming back on him for that. She actually accuses him of weakness. And
Mm.
she throws it like, which is not the way of the Sith. And Bane did not like that. Like, do not serve me what I've been cooking. And he says that she knows nothing of the true ways of the Sith, because she's stuck learning from masters who've forgotten their past. I loved that. I thought that
Mm.
was like a great little, like, ooh, right back at you, girl. And then he says, well, sorry, your plan didn't work out, kind of thing. And so he calls her right out on that too. But the thing that Githany gets out of this is that, okay, he didn't kill Kas'im when he had the chance to, or I keep calling him Kas'im, didn't kill Sirak when he had the chance to do it. And that once the passion of the moment has faded and he was no longer driven by that bloodlust and dark side, that she knows she's safe, that he can't
Mhm.
kill an ally without justification. And she's going to use that later on. So, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think Githany's shortcoming in this way of thinking is that she's basically decided that Bane can't evolve. Now, she has a bit of a reason to believe that because when he defeated Korg earlier in the book, he completely retreated from the dark side. Now, that's not what Bane does here. He comes away from
Right.
this party. It's like, this is different. I can still feel the force being with me. And he's still angry and whatever like that. But he has his own reason. And I think she's part of the way there with Bane, that, he didn't want to necessarily kill Sirak, but I think she doesn't actually understand all the reasons why. One, killing Sirak benefits her, but it doesn't necessarily benefit Bane in this point. He's
Mm-hmm.
completely humbled Sirak in this moment, but Sirak is still better than Githany, right? And so
Oh,
as much
yeah.
as those two might be allies, when you get rid of Sirak in the situation, well, then Githany only has Bane to focus on. And despite the fact that they have some, romantic thoughts about each other, she is about accumulating the power and this, that, and the other. Now, I'm putting words in Bane's mouth. He does not articulate this in this portion of the book, but there very much is a portion that's like, killing Sirak was your plan. Defeating Sirak was my plan in here. And so, but there is a kernel of truth to her words, and that stings Bane. And that's one of the reasons why he gets so angry here.
Right. Absolutely. And, getting back to Kas'im too, do you think that he's actually unknowingly helping to create the Sith, aka Darth Bane, who will destroy the Brotherhood?
I'm sorry, rephrase that or say it again.
So is Kas'im unknowingly helping to create the Sith who will destroy the Brotherhood later on? Is
Unknowingly, yeah.
yeah.
Unknowingly, yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
Mhm.
And the thing is that we see these repeated moments of frustration with Kas'im, but we also have seen these opportunities like when Bane shows up at his chambers chapters ago, and he's basically saying, "You should train me." And Kas'im doesn't immediately say, "You're crazy," and shove him back out of the room.
Right.
He lets him in, and he hears him out, and then he engages in the training. And Kas'im is enamored with the idea of training Bane and making him great. There's other motives that we haven't discovered yet for Kas'im doing that, but we've also kind of see that Kas'im, he's part of the Brotherhood of Darkness. Is it because out of necessity, or is it because he believes in it? And I think it's more of a necessity that all the other Sith have joined this. Why is, and they know who he is, if it's kind of a conform or die type of situation. But he seems to be happy in his role, which is that he's there on Korriban. He is, we talked about this before, that he's like kind of eager to like watch his students like channel the dark side. And that's one of the things he admonished Bane about. It's like, you're spending too much time concentrating on the maneuvers, and all those forms and all those combinations are so that you can free up your mind, so that you can give yourself over to the force and concentrate on the force. And so he sees that, Bane's done that type of a thing where, Khan and Cortus and all the other Sith are more interested in banding together and taking over the galaxy and defeating the Jedi. Whereas Kas'im, I guess, is for defeating the Jedi, but he really is about like excelling in saber mastery and the type of thing, which is not ideally aligned with Bane, but a whole lot more closer to the ideals that Bane comes to embody.
Oh, absolutely. I really like Kas'im. He's one of my
Mm-hmm.
favorite characters in this book, quite honestly. And
Yeah.
you're right, he kind of wavers back and forth. I don't know if I'd say wavers. He just sort of embodies a little bit, like you said, of both.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to buy into the Brotherhood, but yet he's also, again, doing all the things that he does, as we've seen all the way up through.
Right.
So,
And
yeah.
think of the way he talks about this is like, Khan decided this,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
he never says like we. He always
Yeah.
puts like, the reason why that things are organized the way they are is because Khan
Khan.
abolished,
Mhm.
Khan decided that we weren't going to use the Darth title. And so, okay, Khan decided that, but it's like, quote unquote, for the betterment of all of you, but you're following Khan. I mean, Khan might as well be Darth Khan in in this situation. And Kas'im won't admit that that's a good thing, that he likes
Mhm.
that's a good
Mhm.
idea.
Yep, no, I think you nailed it, absolutely. So, speaking of Kas'im, so after the fight, after all this with Githany, Bane goes back to his chambers, and he is analyzing the fight, his confrontation with Githany, and their relationship with each other, and then all of a sudden, there's a knock on the door, and it happens to be Kas'im. So, Kas'im we get Kas'im's backstory at this
Mm-hmm.
point and where he comes from. So, he comes, walking in the door with this lightsaber, and he presents it to Bane. And he explains that it was his master's, Master Nadaz, and they go on to explain what the lightsaber looks like. It's got a hooked handle and a red blade. And then he goes a little bit into, once again, like I said, his backstory and his upbringing, and that he had parents and he was basically purchased by Nadaz. And so then from there, Bane asks if Cortus is, approving of this, and Kas'im tells him of his decision, and he says, "You know what? I didn't have this lightsaber for 10 years, only for Cortus and the other masters to tell me who I could give it to." And Bane says, "Well, did your master give it to you?" To which Kas'im replies, "No, I took it when I killed him."
Mm-hmm.
And so, I could just see like Bane, the hair on the back of his neck, if he had any, standing up and thinking, "Oh, okay. This is very much in line with the rule of two kind of thing, that he might be embroidering in his mind at this point." So I think that's really cool because it was the old ways before Khan actually changed things. So, how do you feel about that whole interaction?
Yeah, you're just talking about how much you like Kas'im, and I'm in complete agreement with you on this. I think he's a great character in here, and in his own way, he doesn't want to say it. He doesn't want to. I don't think he wants to give Bane the credit, but I think he really admires this idea that Bane, these ideas that Bane starts to propose. This idea that there should be this Darth title. We should be trying to exert supremacy, because that's what Kas'im was just talking about. It's like, I killed my master because I thought I could, and I need to prove it myself that I was the best in this
Mhm.
situation. That's what the rule 2 is that you want that power, you crave that power, and then you train to the point where you're strong enough that you need to challenge the master and defeat him. And if you do, then you're the master. And if you don't, then you've been destroyed, and the master finds a new apprentice. And that's how the Sith grow. And that's what Kas'im wanted to do. He wanted to put himself up against his master to prove he had surpassed him. And that's an ideal that Bane embraces. And I can't remember exactly everything that Bane said, but that's whole, I was like, oh, did Cortus, what does Cortus think about this? And as you pointed out, I was like, I didn't carry this for 10 years to get Cortus's permission on this. in its way, it's like Kas'im marking Bane. This is my apprentice. I've
Yes.
deemed him worthy. I've given him this lightsaber. And this will come up in like the final bit of this chapter here in just a second. And then also, I can't remember what the comment was that Bane makes, but Kas'im is like, well, yeah, I've taught you everything that you know, but not everything that I know. You aren't ready to
Love
challenge
that.
me yet.
Yes.
And so I, this should be some foreshadowing if you're reading this book for the first time about what Kas'im's motivations are with training Bane in this here at the academy, and why he's so excited that Bane, and looking back just a bit, Kas'im stopped the fight. He said enough, and then he praised Bane for achieving Dunmok and just using secrecy here. And I can't help but wonder if a bit of that was that if Bane had destroyed Sirak, then the other masters would have taken upon themselves to punish Bane, to eliminate Bane, and not allowed Bane to develop in the way that Kas'im wants going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I think about this is so fantastic in this gesture of Kas'im giving this lightsaber to Bane. As you said, it kind of like marks him in a way,
Mhm.
because obviously the other masters know whose lightsaber that is. And so if Bane's going to be walking around with this on his belt, it's almost like likened to, oh yeah, you show up at school the next morning, wearing your boyfriend's varsity jacket. Like, I know people of a certain age will understand that reference, or their
Right.
class ring, kind of thing. So it's obviously, as you said, he's sort of endorsing Bane in that way. And that's a huge statement. It's almost like a, kind of a take that, masters. I'm going to do what I
Mhm.
want, sort of thing. And I've got this, I've got Bane here on to kind of prove it. And so I think that's a big statement on Kas'im's part, obviously. And the fact that he really talked Bane up when he gave it to him, because Bane takes the hilt and he's like, oh, it's kind of, weird. And he says, yeah, but you'll get used to it. I think it complements your fighting style very well too. So it was obviously a well thought out kind of thing. And it's almost like a passing the baton in some ways too. I just think that this particular scene was so fantastic in that way. I mean, I just think it's loaded with so much, meaning and symbolism in that.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. And so Bane like stays up for a while, kind of like a kid with a new toy at Christmas time. He's like playing with it for a while until the next morning. And Bane is told that he needs to go see Cordis, so he's being called to the principal's office. And so as soon as he walks in, Cordis notices that saber on Bane's belt, and he just basically acknowledges it and says, well, this just because you're walking around with a lightsaber doesn't mean it changes anything. You're
Yep.
still an apprentice just like everybody else. However, you're a role model. And he calls him out with his lessons with Githany. And I love the fact how like Bane just, you can just tell when you're caught in a lie kind of thing.
Mhm.
And he just pales, he's just like like this cold little like chill runs through him. But Cordis goes on to say, it's got to stop. Like this has to end. And he even goes as far as to prohibit the two of them from seeing each other unless they are in the group sessions. And this is not sitting well with Bane already, but Bane realizes that Cordis is controlling him. It's all
Mhm.
about the control. And he also, this is the cherry on top of the sundae, I guess you could say, he further prohibits Bane from studying the ancient texts and archives. And again, that is the thing that always sets Bane off when people are dissing the archives. And so Bane says the Sith may have changed, but we can still build on the knowledge of those who came before us. And he actually believes that the spirits may still linger in their tombs. And Cordis is just not having any of this, right? He just thinks
Mhm.
it's all a bunch of malarkey. And Bane follows up with telling Cordis that he believes he can actually learn more from the ghosts in the Valley of the Dark Lords than from the masters at the Academy. So he's just like, take that, Cordis. Cordis didn't like that at all. He actually slaps Bane across the face with his talons, across his cheek. Bane doesn't even flinch. And then Cordis kicks him out and says, get out of the temple. If you think you can learn so much in the Valley of the Dark Lords, then be gone. So
Right.
what do you think of this confrontation?
Well, it goes to show you how weak Cordis actually is in all of this. And there's a realm where the Brotherhood of Darkness actually works, where everyone puts aside their egos and they draw upon the dark side, they subjugate the galaxy, and then they all share in the power, and then so the other. But that's not the Sith in nature. These are, Cordis and Khan and others are all these first generation, so to speak, Sith Masters in the Brotherhood of Darkness, and they're still clinging, whether they want to acknowledge it or not, they're still clinging to this old way of claiming your own power, and this notion that Cordis is trying to claim Bane's success. It's why he prohibits him from seeing Githany again, beyond the fact that I think Cordis is also jealous of Bane's getting, Githany's affections, so to speak. And also it's the, Bane is a threat to this establishment. If he keeps going, no one else wants to put the effort into reading the ancient texts, to studying those things, and to learning everything there is to do. So how do we stunt Bane's growth? You can't do it anymore. You have to embrace this new order that we've got. And Bane points out, it's like, what are you talking about? You just saw the results of me studying the ancient texts. This is how I got here. And he's like, yeah, well, now you've got to step up and say the Brotherhood of Darkness is the way to go. That this is where I got it, which it's a lie. It's a complete lie. And so Bane's like, well, there's secrets out there for us with the ancient Sith and the Valley. And if we go out there and we can still discover them. And Cordis even fights back. Like, no, the Jedi, they raided all these tombs. They took everything. But Bane just said, like, no. The ancient Sith would not reveal themselves to anyone that wasn't worthy. The Jedi would not be worthy. And so, he keeps coming back with a response to everything that Cordis has to say. And it shows how weak Cordis really is. The position at the head of the academy is not insignificant, but it's not Khan's position. It's not anybody else that's out there on the front line. And so Bane is set up to go out into the galaxy and do great things for the Sith. And so he wants that credit, like, he was at my academy. This is where he learned to do everything. But the Bane's methodology threatens all of that. And so, yeah, it's a very telling scene in this book, the way that Cordis responds to all this. Kas'im, he goes out there and he's not going around telling one's like, I trained this guy, but it's obvious the lightsaber marks Bane. I gave him this lightsaber. It was my master's lightsaber. Well, gee, why does Bane suddenly have Kas'im's master's lightsaber? And Cordis can't take that lightsaber away without creating an issue with Kas'im. But what he can do is prohibit him from going and studying with Githany and going in and studying those texts so that he can claim some portion of Bane's success.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And well said. Because, there's just so much about with Cordis and Khan that they're, for all of their claim to be so high up in the Brotherhood of Darkness, which obviously they are, they really don't have the type of power that they should have. You know what I mean? And so, and Bane sees that. He sees that black and white, and I think that that's why he gave him the dig about, well, heck, I can learn more from the Valley of the Dark Lords than I could ever learn from you. And so I think a main theme too is that knowledge, and Bane sees it, knowledge is the ultimate power.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where he's going to gain his power. Obviously there's a lot of the physical aspect to that as well. And, Bane is also looking at tradition versus his own personal evolution. And, he's not going to be caught up in those ways because he knows that it's just going to trap him. And I love that. And I think, if we're thinking about this as kind of the hero's journey, we're getting to, and again, I don't know the exact steps in this. So if this is incorrect, somebody let me know, but he's at another threshold. Because I know that there's, two different, you've got the ordinary world and the special world. And then there's different thresholds that you go through. And this is definitely getting him into the second threshold for his supreme ordeal. So very exciting from here on out for sure, and seeing where he goes.
He's off to find the elixir. Coming
Yes.
back a changed man. So.
For sure. So do you think by the chapter's end, is Bane seeking power, purpose, or both at this point?
No, I think he knows his purpose. I think he's read enough in the ancient texts and has experienced enough from the masters here at the academy that, look, I know how it's supposed to be. I've seen who the most powerful masters are by reading the ancient texts. And some of that's mythology. It's not these guys. They aren't doing that. And there's so much more to be gained. They claim to follow the code, but they're not actually embracing it. They're reciting parts of it that are convenient, but then they say things that are clumsy, like what Kas'im said. And that's not really the case. So what he goes out to do is he's going to go learn more. He's gotten everything he can out of this academy. Now, part of this is frustration, and of course, actually kind of, I think, is trying to manipulate him. Yeah, go out into that valley. You're not going to survive. Yeah, I'll be done with you. You'll come back as a failure, and then I will asserted my dominance again in this situation. And so, no, Bane, the seeds are there. Bane knows that this his destiny isn't necessarily what the Brotherhood of Darkness would tell him it is, but exactly what that is going forward, he doesn't quite know yet.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that Bane would have sought the quote unquote blessing of Cordis to go to the Valley of the Dark Lords, but just the way that it went down, it gave him the excuse to go explore it?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think he's respected Cordis for a long time, and I don't know that he realized that after he was first defeated by Sirak. But as he's gained more experience, as he's trained in secret, and he's overcome the obstacles that had put in front of him, he wasn't allowed to. Basically, Cordis instructed all the masters to shun him, but he convinced Kas'im to train him, and he told Kas'im, "Hey, you're going to get the credit when I prevail," and which is in defiance of Cordis. And so this, I think, was probably something that Bane was considering, maybe not doing right that moment, but Cordis's rebuke of his success, in a way, I think is like, well, fine. If you're going to put all these limitations on me and I can't do these things that had brought me to this point, I'll go to the next thing. And what Cordis really couldn't stop him at this point. The guy who just became the most dominant apprentice here, now has, a vision of how he's going to get better. Well, you don't think it's going to work, but you can't execute him. You can't send him to his room without the whole academy questioning what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. And I think what you just said too about the fact that he realized how powerful Bane was becoming is maybe the reason why he wanted to control him so much too, because he kind of saw him as being like, well, maybe he's going to come after my position, which of course Bane had absolutely no desire to do, but Cordis doesn't know that.
Right.
Yeah, that's a big part of that. Absolutely. So what else do you think from these chapters that is worth noting, or anything else that you want to add to it before we wrap it up?
Oh, only this. It's just it's kind of a sense of relief, because Bane's not a good guy. He's his Sith, and he develops the rule too. I mean, that's not spoiling anything. There's 2 more books in all this,
Right.
and it's called Darth Bane. It's not Bane the Apprentice in this situation, but he's still the protagonist of this book. So even though he's not a good person, and you could say he's evil in some ways, but he is all about self-determination. He is all about, overcoming the obstacles. His chains are broken, to quote the Sith code and stuff like that. But, we saw him at his low point when Sirak ultimately destroyed him, and then he had to spend all that time in the back tank, and then he was shunned by the academy. So having him as our protagonist and getting the victory here is satisfying in that regard. So it's really fun to see where he goes from here as he continues to develop his powers and his abilities and assert himself.
Oh, yeah. Buckle up. It's going to be quite a ride. And I know I'm the same way. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love these books is because it's so deliciously satisfying to root for the bad guy. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, like you said, Bane's the bad guy. But I think that's why we love these books so much too.
Right.
It's just a lot of fun. So, with that in mind, please make sure that you tune in once again next month as we explore the next chapters in our book club for the year for Darth Bane, Path of Destruction. And I believe, are we doing 3 chapters or 2 next month? Remind me. So, like I was saying, buckle up, Buttercup, because we've got 2 chapters next month. We've got chapters 18 and 19 to dive into. And so make sure you're ready for that. And so we're planning on, once again, towards the end of July to dive in with those. So, with that, thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and this entry in our Darth Bane book club discussion. And before we go, we just want to let you know that you can find all of our shows over on RetroZap, and we sure hope that you would subscribe to the show over there. And while you're at it, you can also check out all of the other wonderful shows over on retrozap.com, including things like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Case Files, Animanicast, Brews and Blasters, Dark Lair, Dunecast, Enjoy Stuff, Love, Death, and Robots Plus, Superhero Suite, and Warp Trails. So please subscribe, like, rate, all the things. And also, while you're at it, if you are on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review over there because that one just seems to boost us up the algorithms just a little bit more. But we'll definitely take those ratings and reviews wherever you listen to your podcasts, which includes, but not limited to, Audible and Spotify, and a few others that Dennis is going to let you know about here in just a second. And don't forget to connect with us on social media and share the show there as well. So with that, Dennis, why don't you remind everybody where those social media contacts and other places to listen to the show happen to be?
All right. So the classic places to find us are Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. We have boards over on Pinterest that Jay manages. The show is available on YouTube and YouTube Music, but audio only. If you want to get a more involved message to us, then you can reach us by email at podcaststardust@gmail.com. And then if you're looking for our t-shirts and other merch, the best place to do that is over at TeePublic. I've got a link in the show notes. You can find the t-shirts, stickers, and the like over there. Jay, what do you got going on in cosplay?
All right. Well, as always, you can check out my cosplay on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And you can catch me as Ahsoka, the Fourth Sister, my 2 different versions of Hera, actually, and my original concept Mandalorian. I've always wanted to do a couple of Old Republic, and maybe we'll dive into that at some point. But you never know. I get inspired. But with that, we've got a couple things upcoming on the show, as always. So on Friday, we have our regular news episode. And then Monday, we have our next installment in our The Clone Wars Rewatch series. So once again, thanks for listening to episode 1052, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.